Princess Alice led an extraordinary life spanning 8 remarkable decades. Born in 1885 at the height of Queen Victoria's rule in England, Alice was a princess descended from royalty across Europe. Though she struggled with congenital deafness and mental health issues, she persevered to become a selfless humanitarian and religious devotee. Alice's early life unfolded against the backdrop of an empire in transition. As the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Alice enjoyed the splendors of a Gilded Age at its zenith. Her parents, themselves of German noble lineage, ensured she received an education befitting a princely daughter, fluent in multiple languages and well-versed in music and arts. At 17, stunningly beautiful, Alice attended the coronation of King Edward VI, and soon after married Prince Andrew of Greece, receiving fabulous Russian diamonds among over $750,000 in wedding gifts that dazzled European nobility. The early years of marriage proved both joyful and tumultuous for Alice. While pregnant with their 5th child, she worked tirelessly, establishing field hospitals for wounded soldiers during the Balkan Wars of 1912-13. King George B honored her humanitarian contributions with the Royal Red Cross in 1913. The following year, just after the outbreak of World War I, Alice gave birth to her 4th daughter. The war years unleashed great suffering and upheaval for her adopted homeland Greece, causing immense stress on both the country and Alice's family. In 1917, Alice's cousin Tsar Nicholas II was executed during the Russian Revolution. Despite such surrounding turmoil, Alice gave birth to her only son, Prince Philip, in 1921. Within months, fighting forced the Greek royals into exile, with baby Philip famously evacuated in an orange crate cot. Forced from their homeland, Alice's family subsisted on the goodwill of European relatives throughout the 1920s. The strain of living as impoverished exiles in Paris proved too much for Alice. In 1930, beset by voices and religious visions, she suffered a severe nervous breakdown. With psychiatric treatment in its infancy, Alice was diagnosed as schizophrenic, undergoing analysis by the renowned Sigmund Freud. Seeking relief from her supposed sexual frustrations, Freud subjected Alice to crude X-ray treatments targeting her ovaries, likely triggering premature menopause. With mental health support still extremely limited, Alice spent years convalescing in sanatoriums, separated from even her young children for long stretches. Emerging from this long solitary exile, Alice dedicated herself to charity and religious causes through the 1930s-40s. She founded an order of Orthodox nuns in 1935, though never officially joined the sisterhood herself. When World War II erupted, Alice remained in volatile Greece while most of her family escaped to safety abroad. During 1943-44, as senior member of the Greek royals left in occupied Athens, Alice hid a Jewish widow and 2 sons in her residence, saving them from Nazi persecution. When the war finally ended, Alice was 60 years old, but with her people still ravaged from occupation, she was just beginning her life's purpose. Taking vows as a nun and becoming Mother Superior of her order, Alice spent years working in impoverished neighborhoods of Athens, establishing orphanages, schools for the deaf, and an Orthodox nursing order known as the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary. Well into her 70s and 80s, Alice traveled broadly on missions of charity and faith, from trips to heal schisms between Christian churches to pilgrimages to sacred sites in Russia, and even crossing the Atlantic to visit her by then world-famous son Prince Philip. Princess Alice's extraordinary journey spanned an epoch of monumental events: world wars, revolutions, depressions, and titanic historical shifts, remaking the map of Europe. As royalty, she enjoyed the comforts of privilege in youth before traumatic exile plunged her into anonymity and adversity for decades. She overcame much, including personal tragedy and stigma surrounding mental illness. In spite of all life threw at her, she spent her last 40 years pouring herself into humanitarian and spiritual causes greater than herself. When she died in 1969 at age 84, she had indeed lived 1,000 lives. Devout Orthodox nun, fearless spree sister against fascism, tireless worker amongst the poor, and mother of royalty and rebels alike. Little Prince Philip was just 9 years old when his mother suddenly disappeared. He was left wondering what happened to her as he bounced between relatives, including his uncle Lord Mountbatten. Meanwhile, Alice remained locked up in the facility against her will for over 2 years. Philip's father, Prince Andrew, essentially abandoned his mentally ill wife to go live with his mistress on the French Riviera, never bothering to get a divorce. He later died in Monaco in 1944. So young Philip endured a fractured, unstable upbringing without either parent present. When Alice was finally released in 1932, she aimlessly drifted between modest pensions and hotels in Germany. It took 5 more years before she and teenage Philip were briefly reunited at the funeral of Philip's sister Cecily, who had died tragically in a plane crash. At that point in 1937, newly restored Greek monarchy, Alice wanted 16-year-old Philip to return with her to Athens. But his future was already set on a path in the British Royal Navy. Heartbreakingly, Alice was left to face more years of loneliness. By 1941, the princess was stranded in Athens during the Nazi occupation of Greece. Yet despite her own suffering, she selflessly aided Jews who were being persecuted. At great personal risk, Alice sheltered a Jewish family secretly in her home, literally right under the nose of the Gestapo headquarters next door. When questioned, she pretended not to understand their inquiries. As Prince Philip later recounted with pride, "I suspect that it never occurred to her that her action was in any way special. She was a person with deep religious faith, and she would have considered it to be a totally human action to fellow human beings in distress." Remarkably, Alice survived the dangers of war and aftermath. She went on to sell her precious jewels to establish a religious order of nuns in 1949. The convent also served as an orphanage supporting poor children. Even in old age, Alice refused to abandon others in need. When the Greek military staged a violent coup in 1967, the elderly princess initially refused evacuation until Prince Philip sent a plane for her at the Queen's urging. Alice spent her frail final years living in Buckingham Palace near her son. She passed away in 1969 at age 84, having endured immense mental anguish but never losing her compassion and principles along the way. Initially laid to rest at Windsor Castle as royalty, in later years her remains were transferred to Jerusalem per her wishes to be buried next to her Aunt Ella. Decades later, the princess' courageous protection of the Jewish family was brought to light. Prince William paid tribute at her grave in 2018, proclaiming, "Her story is a matter of great pride for my whole family." Although she struggled tremendously with mental illness, Princess Alice devoted her life to aiding those less fortunate, from hiding refugees to establishing orphanages. She placed others above herself until the very end. Just before her death, she penned a touching letter to Prince Philip, "Dearest Philip, be brave, and remember I will never leave you." After a lifetime of turmoil for both mother and son, surely her unwavering love was a comfort for the Duke of Edinburgh in his final years. Truly, Princess Alice was a woman who turned personal pain into selfless sacrifice and remains an inspiration to the royal family. Dear friend, if you like everything new about the royal family and don't want to miss all the novelties, subscribe to our channel and like it. By doing so, you take part in our development. We work for you.